Okay, so this week's slate of shows were, I don't want to say, situational, but their placement in regards to their brand's pay-per-view kind of influenced not only how the show, I believe, was written, but also how the shows were run just in the first place. Or just, yeah, I'm not even exactly sure how to describe it. Intensity was more enjoyable for the factor that it is the go-home show to Retaliation, while Severity is in the middle of the climb up towards their Caution pay-per-view. So I wouldn't be, remiss to say that Intensity had the benefit of what their placement on or what this show was placed into and the position the show was placed into in regards to the upcoming pay-per-view. And I think that tends to be the overwhelming trend with USW shows. These weekly shows, 2 weekly shows, monthly pay-per-views, both at different times in the month, kind of have this permanent imbalance between both brands that just really tends to disappoint when you look at things in the long run. One way or another, let's get down to business. First, we go with Intensity because obviously it came first in the week. The opening segment was the Promised Land and Suzuki Kirikashi. They walked out, talked about how Akron was going to fall to the Promised Land, much like many before him, and Kirikashi would become the new USW champion before running Intensity as the world champion of the roster, or the leader of the roster. I kind of like the way he phrased it because he said the leader of the roster in specific. And considering the Promised Land is the most cult-like stable, aside from Metric, which I don't even know what the fuck you can describe Metric as now, but I think the most stable, or the most consistent stable, there you go, the most consistent stable that can be kind of looked at as a cult would be the Promised Land. You've got Kirikashi at the top, promising, this power and success and greatness for the people that tag along with him or his followers. And the fact that Blaine North and Samuel North haven't done all too much since leaving the Promised Land kind of accidentally gives Kirikashi's message a little bit more ammunition. And the fact that Kirikashi is always the one, at the top of the card, or at the very least, even if contending for the Red Belt or Global Championship, is in a higher status on the card than Tanner Wallace or Blaine North or Samuel North or George Martin were. So that I really like, and I'm actually interested to see what happens if Tanner Wallace or George Martin begin to find success on their own, and if that becomes the storyline, how it would work with the Promised Land having somebody else in the stable more powerful or gaining more success than Kirikashi himself. I really look forward to what happens with that case, because I've been expecting that for the past few months, perhaps. But leading the entire roster kind of makes it sound as if the Promised Land is going to become Intensity, and Kirikashi at the top is going to have everyone essentially kind of be looked at as his disciples, gunning for success. But there's no success clearly to be had higher than Kirikashi, since he would be at the top of the card. So I'm interested to see how that dynamic plays out, because the way he worded it was all too specific for it to just be something said in passing. So George Martin proceeds then to grab a microphone and cut a promo. He talks about how he wasn't around to see the new Northern Lights tossed out of the Promised Land, or that while he wasn't around to see wasn't around, I guess, the Promised Land to watch the new Northern Lights be tossed out. He knows that it must have been for them being unable to accept the truth, and that they are better off with the Promised Land than they are fighting against their power. So As I said, really interested to see how the failure of the new Northern Lights, now that we can kind of look at them in specific having failed, really interested to see how these kind of stories and how the backstory of the Promised Land really ends up working out. And that's the end of the opening segment. They walked back from the locker room, and end of opening scene. We then get the first match on the card. Tyreek Carver, who will be going up against, I think, Mr. Anthony, with a blue belt title on the line, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's fighting Mr. Anthony for the blue belt title. Defeated Otis Crane via submission. The ending of the match came when Hardy ran down to the ring during the match, only to get thrown over the top by Otis Crane, who then got rolled up by Tyreek Carver. I guess he kicks out of the roll up, and Tyreek Carver kind of sinks in the carved template, pulling him back into the one-armed chicken wing sleeper hold. Obviously, then you kind of have the overbooked sort of bullshit come in where Mr. Anthony runs down, returning the attack from 2 weeks prior that Carver gave to Anthony. Carver, I guess, overhands him eventually. I think he tossed him into the corner post at one point in time. I was surprised to not see Anthony busted open, because that and title shots to the head usually tend to be what cause bleeding in matches, but that didn't happen here. Tyreek Carver hits the power bomb on the edge of the barricade, so Anthony's just kind of folded up on the top of the barricade and probably kind of vulnerable for the match this Sunday. He obviously sold it with a lot of pain and a lot of anguish, so I would be surprised to not see a back issue keep Mr. Anthony from probably hitting the Redwood Viper at some point, or a top rope move and not being able to finish the pinfall, whatever it may be. So you can kind of tell where that whole storyline is going. Hardy getting Crane to lose, kind of causing the brief distraction, I thought was an interesting sort of way of going about it, since most of the time performers just tend to get onto the apron, and the performers in the middle of a submission hold or a pinfall or setting up a finish or whatever it may be, just kind of go from their posts and run at the person on the apron, not doing anything really. This time it was Hardy going into the ring and being chucked over, so it was obviously the active presence of, oh, he's going to fuck up the match. I liked how there was a sense of logic that was used there. And for a guy like Otis Crane, who's just been stellar this year, really happy to see that played into his character. So we go from that match to an interview with Nathan Greenway and Ash about Ash's match against Prophecy on Sunday. Ash talks about how he started kind of whirling downhill on Severity, and that was obviously as a result of losing out in the World Heavyweight Championship tournament at Call to Greatness. But now he is on Intensity. It's a new situation. It is a new roster. It's new opportunities, and opportunities that he desires to take. So I guess, working his way back to the top starts through, I guess you would consider Metric the most powerful stable on the roster. I think they've got like twice the amount of people that any other stable on the roster has. So yeah, I guess that would make sense. I was kind of playing it back in my head, wondering how beating Ash would kind of help him get back to the top, but it would be beating a member of the most powerful stable on the roster. So that makes more sense when you put it into perspective. But one way or another, I love the playing into the fact of Ash understanding that it has been a downhill slope since Call to Greatness, and I like the kind of accepting of his failures in an effort to redeem himself and fight for that redemption. Match number 2, Haley Osser and Taylor Hell defeat USW Women's Champion Alicia Sinclair and Peyton Hawthorne. The ending of the match came when I believe it was Alicia Sinclair trying to attack Oscar from behind with the title belt, but Taylor Hell kind of, I don't know exactly where she came from, but she just kind of bolted into the ring and dropkicked Sinclair out of the way. And so Oscar kind of turns around, sees that Peyton Hawthorne tries to get her into position for the Hawk's Eye, but Haley Oscar kind of, I don't know exactly what she did, but I assume it was something like a knee directed to Hawthorne's gut, allowing Oscar the opportunity to hit the Glimmer of Hope. But one way or another, she manages to kind of fight off the Hawk's Eye attempt and hit the Glimmer of Hope for the win. So Oscar then offers a fist bump to Taylor Hell, who just fist bumps her back and leaves the ring. I don't exactly know what to make of this. Taylor Hell is obviously an intensity performer now, so it's interesting to see her go from the batshit crazy lunatic she was on Severity to what I assume is a babyface run on intensity. But you can never really be too sure. One way or another, the factor of Taylor Hell saving Haley Oscar from Sinclair's attack from behind with the belt, and the symbolism of the fist bump kind of just, usually it would be Taylor Hell going, "I saved ya, let's just leave it at that." But this was an actual return of or an actual sign of respect towards Haley Oscar. I saved you, but whatever, we're cool. That I'm not exactly sure what to completely make of that. I can tell it's going in a babyface turn. However, the fact that Haley Oscar and Alicia Sinclair are knee deep into a championship picture that Taylor Hell hasn't really truly been able to crack into yet makes me wonder exactly where this Taylor Hell babyface run can go, because it can either involve some sort of altercation with her and Oscar, or an altercation with her and Sinclair. Whatever it may be, I'm just going to pay attention to it. Then we get Lucas and Mia Bing walking around backstage before they run into Rosaline, who is welcoming them to Wednesday Night Intensity. Lucas Bing tells her that she just welcomed a future USW champion to Intensity and tells her to remember the moment. Rosaline looks over at Mia, thanks her for the introduction, and they walk off, leaving Rosaline just kind of standing alone in confusion as to what exactly happened. So Lucas Bing and Mia Bing are a brother and sister tandem that are now newcomers to the Intensity roster. I'm not exactly sure what to make of this altercation, because I'm not sure in the way that they said it, whether or not it was meant as a brazen sign of, "You're looking at a future world champion," or if it was just this sort of foreshadowing of what could be in Lucas Bing's future. So I don't know exactly whether that was meant to be a babyface altercation or a heel altercation. Right now, he's just kind of in the middle. He's new. It's going to be interesting to see how the crowd reacts to him. There haven't been too many of these kind of cases where, for one, there's not been a brother and sister tandem brought on to programming. So that's going to be a new dynamic to kind of follow. But for number two, we haven't seen many newcomers run on singles runs in a while and have it work. I think Severity gets Choi Ji-Yu this week, which is going to be interesting to watch, but very, very intrigued to see how they book these two, especially considering the women's division is already kind of filled out with Sinclair, Oscar, Hell, Hawthorne's getting in the mix. and her Equinox and Dina Lawson are just, they're bound to do something soon. So I don't exactly know where Mia Bing is going to fit into that picture. And with the red belt title picture already essentially being Otis Crane's to run, because I have a feeling about where Retaliation is going this week. And then obviously Anthony Carver, you got Hills and Franklin in the USW tag team title picture, but they're rumored to go up into the blue belt title picture. And the USW title picture is kind of also filled out with Akron and Kirikashi, most likely Eli Kaner when he comes in, Quincy Newsom when he comes in, James when he comes back. I don't exactly know what Lucas Bing is going to do in the long run, and I don't exactly know what a temporary feud with nothing on the line is exactly going to do for him. But we'll kind of get to that point when we see it one way or another. The third match on the card was Andrew Morris with Seth of the Promised Land of Metric, beating George Martin with Tanner Wallace and Suzuki Kirikashi, the USW champion waiting, I guess, because I guarantee you there's something going on at Retaliation that's going to bring the title into. I'm already getting used to it. Of the Promised Land. Fair match, decent match. The way that the Intensity has been kind of booking matches to go about 15 to 20 minutes shows that they're putting an emphasis on the product in the ring, but at the same time, they're focusing on the storytelling aspect backstage and in promos and interviews. One way or another, Andrew Morris is... Sorry, I think I wrote this wrong. My bad. So Samuel North hits a swinging cutter on Tanner Wallace. And how did I... Okay, I'll just... Whatever. One way or another, George Martin is laid out by Tanner Wallace accidentally with the brass knuckles. And then Tanner Wallace gets knocked off of the ring apron. Andrew Morris then comes in, pins George Martin to win the match. So Samuel North and Blaine North are obviously in the midst of the feud with George Martin and Tanner Wallace of the Promised Land. So we're back to this whole Northern Lights versus, I guess, the new Promised Land, if anything. Clearly, I forgot to mention that. My apologies. But one way or another, the fact that they just cost the Promised Land a match kind of also forebodes this Sunday and the way that Intensity's been booked. Whatever. Fourth match on the card, main event, USW champion Philip Akron beat red belt champion Zach Hardy with Chain Norris. Wow. Chain reaction in the Stargazers. Otis Crane cost Zach Hardy the match. That's the finish. Akron then just kind of stands tall with Otis Crane with the USW title in the air to signal the go home for Retaliation. It was an enjoyable show, one that you didn't necessarily need to watch, but one that was, surely worth 2 hours of your time, no matter what. Then we'll get into the Friday night Severity card. We have 3 weeks to go until Caution. So Hearn Astley, the World Heavyweight Champion, walks out, cuts a promo about how everyone trying to pull a fast one on him will end up like Crimson Red laid out in the middle of the ring as, looking more and more as a jackass, failing and failing and failing. So Crimson Red kind of runs down how Hearn Astley is a selfish asshole, can do nothing without the World Heavyweight Championship, and kind of makes it out to be like Hearn Astley is going to end up like another Capital, a guy who did nothing without the world title, was great with the world title, but did nothing without the world title, meant nothing. There was nothing unique about him, no reason to like him, so on and so forth, which, you kind of got a point. One way or another, the main event will be competed between Crimson Red and... Christ alive. What was I on to write this? My God. Holy shit. The main event is fucking hell. Give me... Okay. Hearn Astley and Crimson Red to the World Heavyweight Championship. There you go. Christ, wow. I completely botched this shit. Match number 1 was the World Heavyweight Championship Gold Rush semifinals, which is a tournament currently going on to determine the new number 1 contender for the World Heavyweight title. Jake Porter beat Sir Violence Washington. This match just seems to keep happening. Washington goes to hit the elbow to the back of Porter, but like he did with Kevin Storm last week, Porter ducks, knees him in the face. Then he hit Washington with the ramification for the clean pinfall victory. I don't exactly know why, but, you know, whatever. I thought he gave the ramification to Jack Ramsey. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe they just decided not to go with that angle, but whatever. Jake Porter uses the ramification for the win, moves on to the finals. Backstage interview, Anna Walczyk with global champion Lone Wolf, who's got a contract expiring soon, so I don't exactly know what that means for his title defense at Caution. But Ramsey walks into the area, challenges Lone Wolf to a match for the global title at Caution, or with the global title on the line at Caution. Lone Wolf looks up at Jack Ramsey, looks down at the global title, back to Ramsey, accepts the challenge, shakes Ramsey's hand, making the match official. So Jack Ramsey versus Lone Wolf is going to happen at Caution with the global title on the line. Second match on the card, Natalie Dawson and Margot Silva versus Chris Dalton and Olivia Montgomery. Dawson and Silva obviously win. I think Dalton hits the Jane Doe from the top rope on Olivia Montgomery after the fact, which means that Chris Dalton has now turned heel. So that is an interesting little tidbit. We'll see where that goes. I don't think they've kind of given Chris Dalton the Ashley Donovan treatment, where she's, always in the picture but never wins it. So I'm not too confident about how this is going to turn up. One way or another, Jade Oliver's walking up to the locker room before she sees a Barbie doll taped to her door, missing both arms, and rips the doll off of the locker room door and continues down the hallway, chucking the doll into the wall. I don't exactly know what the fuck that altercation was. But the fact that they've got Jade Oliver in this storyline in which she's competing against the women on the Severity roster for attention and notoriety and legitimacy in regards to the World's Women's Championship picture is interesting. But the fact that Cindy Allison Jackson is not getting the same treatment that Jade Oliver is, despite also being new to the Severity roster, means that this isn't really an effort of territorialism. Territorialism, that's not a thing. This isn't a... Wait, no, territorial. Oh, I said territorialism. Guys, I'm rusty. This isn't a territorial sort of thing. This is people hating Jade Oliver. People hating the woman that was in charge of the modern day royalty, cheaply won the USW women's title in some people's eyes. This is an effort directed at Jade Oliver, not for intruding on the Severity locker room, but for being Jade Oliver. I'm interested to see who the mastermind is going to be, because I guarantee you there's one person behind it that's going to lead up to this whole thing. Third match is the World Heavyweight Title Gold Rush semifinals. Norris Cadaveri and the Wine Cellar beats Verse 9. Fun match. Kind of meh. But, yeah, whatever. We get a backstage segment again. Jade Oliver, again, for whatever reason, has the doll in her hands despite chucking it against the wall. So there's a continuity error for you. Storms into Martin Reese's office and demands that he punish Aphrodite for her constant attempts at harassment. If you haven't been aware, this whole territorial sort of thing, Jade Oliver's throwing it upon Aphrodite and not the entire Severity locker room. So, it's kind of like Aphrodite's taking the brunt of the blame for something that probably was not her doing. But she walks through the doors, and the office lights flash a little bit. So this supernatural sort of bullshit kind of happens. Not a fan of that. Didn't even want to talk about it. Aphrodite is then asked if she did that, and Aphrodite just kind of sighs and admits that she did. So it's not necessarily something that I think she did do. I just think it's Aphrodite going, well, you're going to think I did it anyway, so yeah, sure, I did it. Why the hell not? You're not going to believe me if I say no. Martin Reese then puts Aphrodite in a match next week on Severity, in a handicap match against Natalie Dawson and Margot Silva. Aphrodite just chuckles, leaves the room, and Jade Oliver is pissed. You want to punish someone that apparently can flicker lights in the office. You don't really put them up against the two women that fail every time they get the World Women's title in their sights. That's not necessarily a punishment that many people would believe in. Main event for the World Heavyweight title time. Hernastly defeats Crimson Red. After the match, Jake Porter and Norris Kadabri both walk out separately, stand by either side of Hernastly. Hernastly clutches the world title to his chest, while Jake Porter and Norris Kadabri continue to look at each other and back at Hernastly to end the show. So this kind of trio sort of stare off, stare down to end the show. You know what? Now looking back on it, just describing it, I think Severity made more sense. I think this was a show that Severity won. Wasn't the biggest fan necessarily of the whole Hernastly Crimson Red angle being dropped here, but with the Gold Rush tournament in an effort to kind of push forward the long-term strategy for Severity again, I understand why they did it. I really love the Jade Oliver storyline of constantly going towards Aphrodite, the person that you'd think would be in charge of this kind of bullshit. Despite the fact that it's most definitely not Aphrodite, and Aphrodite is pretty sick and tired of people thinking it's her. I really enjoy that aspect. I have no faith in the Chris Dalton angle. I have no faith with them to do anything with her. I'm on Intensity, so I can say that legally. Lone Wolf versus Jack Ramsey, and Jack Ramsey trying desperately to earn his keep on the roster and locker room is awesome and wonderful, and I really enjoy that story. I don't think it's going to go exactly where people think it's going to go in a Jack Ramsey title shot, Jack Ramsey championship run. But, there's always a chance Lone Wolf's contract is coming up. He's rumored to be re-signing, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to re-sign. So this could just be a last-ditch case scenario if Lone Wolf does not re-sign with the company before caution, that they would just put the title on Jack Ramsey just to be safe. Severity was enjoyable. I think that it was a very good competition between Severity and Intensity this week for which was the better show. If anything, I think it was Intensity just for what they or where they were and the position on the card in which they were tasked with performing. The fact that they very clearly have a pay-per-view coming up that they needed to do something with. And the fact that this show was a go-home show and kind of closed up a lot of other things that will get the final touches on Sunday, I think that gives Intensity just the slight edge. But if I'm a wrestling fan, I go to the wrestling show, and that wrestling show is Severity. If I'm a fan of storytelling and following the company and the performance as a whole, I'm dedicated to the product, I'm watching Intensity because there's more substance to be found on the Wednesday night show and the Wednesday night broadcast. With that being said, I think both shows are sort of in a rebuilding phase. James is currently on a sabbatical, much deserved sabbatical. Suzuki Karakashi versus Philip Akron is something that is uncomfortably predictable, but also uncomfortably unpredictable. And the same can be said with the red belt title picture. and what seems like now the blue belt title picture. But yeah, the card is shaping up to be interesting. And the fact that we've got a full lineup, including matches like Peyton Hawthorne versus Taylor Hell, the New Northern Lights and the Promised Land, and Osser and Sinclair to probably steal the show and be the underrated, undervalued, or overlooked matches that just kick ass. Really enjoy that. But again, yeah, if you're just a wrestling fan, aren't too familiar with USW, and want to get a taste of what the storytelling is, you watch Intensity. But if you want to watch it for the wrestling, you want to see what it's worth for the wrestling, you go to the Severity show. If you're dedicated to the product, obviously you watch both, but you probably enjoyed Intensity more for the sake that it gave you more substance, being the go-home show to a pay-per-view, than Severity gave you being just in the middle of a build-up. However, that main event for the world title was something that was definitely unique that we don't get to see too often, a world title match on the weekly shows. But that's my opinion. Obviously, you can give any other opinion you have of the show to me on Twitter at Zachary Serra, at ZachArYSERRA. And yeah, pretty much that. Whatever you're going to call it. This is going to be going up live on YouTube tomorrow morning, I believe. And obviously, you're getting to see it live here on UZ Media, but we've got more to cover, and in just a moment, we'll be getting to Retaliation. But until then, we've got a trailer to play you, and so enjoy that beautiful dialogue.